What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I have a book that I recently got that I want to talk to you a little bit about. Cyborg, Volume 1, Unplugged. This collects Cyborg issues 1 through 6 from the 2015 Cyborg series, as well as DC Sneak Peek Cyborg issue 1. It is by David F. Walker, Ivan Reyes, Joe Prado, and Adriano Lucas. This book was a little bit of a mixed bag for me. Right off the bat, I wanted to talk about something that I had a problem with the Starfire book that I recently reviewed, in that the character in this book is not the Cyborg that I fell in love with. The Cyborg that I like is the one from the Marv Wolfman George Perez run, where he started off as a very angry, antisocial loner. He just didn't like anyone, and he had good reason to be very angry. And then after about 4 or 5 issues of that attitude, he kind of reconciled with his father, and then his father died, and then he was able to move on, and he became more of a level-headed guy. And I don't want to say he was ever team leader material, but by the time he got to the Jeff Johns run, which is not my favorite run of Teen Titans comics, it was very believable that Cyborg was kind of this big brother figure to all of these younger heroes. You go back and look at volumes 2 and 3 of the Marv Wolfman George Perez Teen Titans stuff, those trades that have come out over the last couple years. It's a little bit believable that you can see him going from being this angry kid to being more of a level-headed adult that he kind of grew into over the years. And that was the Cyborg that I fell in love with. This book kind of tries to do the same thing that the Starfire book did, where it combines the George Perez Marv Wolfman version with the cartoon version. And the cartoon version, he wasn't as depressingly angry as he was in Wolfman Perez books, where he was constantly kind of bemoaning his fate because his father basically ruined his life, to hear him say it. But he was, at times, a little bit mellow about his situation in life. And he was also a little bit more arrogant and cocky. A big catchphrase that he had in the cartoon was "booyah," and he says that like 2 or 3 times in this book. And once again, just like in the Starfire book, I have to question the logistics of trying to cross-promote with a cartoon series that ended almost 10 years before this comic book even began. I don't really understand why they would do that. I just can't imagine that anyone who is a huge fan of the Teen Titans cartoon is going to be walking into a comic book shop when Cyborg issue 1 hits the stands, and they're going to say, hey, I remember that character from the cartoon, and they're going to buy this book because of that cartoon. But let's just say hypothetically that that did happen. I don't think that somebody is going to be confused if Cyborg was portrayed like he was back in the Wolfman Perez books in this book. I don't think that him being portrayed differently from how he was in the cartoon would actually confuse anybody if this book was going to bring in people who are huge fans of how the character was portrayed in the cartoon series. I just don't think that that would happen. But then again, I also don't think that it would happen where you would have somebody seeing this book and picking it up just because they were a fan of the character from the cartoon. I just don't understand any of that trying to cross-promote with a cartoon series that was going on back when I was in high school. That I don't really understand that. And this has got a lot of stuff where it's kind of trying to use some of the stuff from the Wolfman Perez Teen Titans series, but also is trying to put a new spin on it. So, in the Wolfman Perez books, Cyborg's father, Silas Stone, he died in like issue 3 or 4. Cyborg spent the first few issues really angry at his father, didn't want anything to do with him, and then finally he finds out that his dad has cancer, I think, and his dad is dying, and then he spends the rest of that issue kind of reconciling with his father, and he spends the rest of his father's life with him, and then his father dies, and then Cyborg is a much more mature person, emotionally speaking. This book, and I'm assuming all the New 52 stuff that came before this, Cyborg's father is still alive, and so he and his father are still at that place where they don't really see eye to eye. He's talking at least several points in his book, at least twice, about how his father never really paid much attention to him when he was younger. He says that at least 2 of the 3 times that his dad paid attention to him was when he was saving his life, turning him into Cyborg. There was one point when he turned him into Cyborg, and another time where I guess he was restoring some of his cybernetic implants or something like that. And I just don't really like the idea of let's regress the character to a point where he was in 1980 so that we can tell some stories with that character from 1980. Personally, I like the idea of Cyborg moving on with his life, reconciling with his father, having a good relationship with his father, and then becoming his own man after his father died. I really don't see the point of let's go ahead and take the character back 35 years and see what he's like whenever his father is still alive. I just don't really see the point of that. Also, Sarah Sims, I guess it's Sarah Sims, in the Marv Wolfman George Perez comics, she was a teacher. She taught kids who were missing limbs, and they all had prosthetic limbs, and that was how Cyborg got to meet her. He was in the park, and then this kid accidentally hit him with a baseball, and when Cyborg is giving him the baseball back, he notices the kid has a prosthetic hand, and then he meets Sarah Sims, who is the teacher of this class. Here, we have a girl named Sarah, and I'm assuming that it is Sarah Sims, but instead of being a teacher for kids with prosthetic limbs, she's, I guess, a lab assistant for Cyborg's father, and she has a thing for him, but he doesn't really seem to notice that she has a thing for him, and I'm assuming that he doesn't have a thing for her. So, once again, I don't really understand why you would need to completely 100% reinvent that character, because they kind of had a very different dichotomy going on in the 1980s Titans comics, where Cyborg had a thing for her, she sort of had a thing for him, but she was also dating this other guy, and he was kind of too scared to tell her how he felt. Here, it's completely reversed, and as such, you're losing a lot of what made this couple so interesting together, especially the fact that she taught kids with prosthetic limbs. I felt like that was part of what made her character work. It made her interesting. She was out there helping people, just like Cyborg was helping people, just not in the same way. And it also gave them something to bond over, because she taught these kids who were sort of in a similar situation that Cyborg was in. Here, I don't really see any reason why these two would bond, other than they've known each other a really long time. I don't know what these characters have in common. I don't see any budding relationship happening here, other than the fact that she has a thing for him. I don't understand why this character named Sarah couldn't have been named anything else. You could call her Alicia or Aristotle or whatever. You could call her anything, literally any name in the world, and you wouldn't even notice that this was supposed to be a reboot of the character Sarah from the 1980s. And then, later on in the series, you could even bring in Sarah Sims if you wanted to, because she is a very different character back then than she is here. But overall, that was a big stumbling block for me, trying to get past all of this stuff that's kind of regressing the character to an earlier point from like 4 months after he was introduced. That really made it difficult for me to enjoy this book. And also, another thing that kind of made it difficult was the story is just not that impressive. So you've got this alien species, and apparently Silas Stone, in every alternate reality in the multiverse, he stole some technology from this alien species to create Cyborg. In one reality, it was him and his wife who he turned into cyborgs, and then in this reality, it's his son Victor. And I guess this alien species, at first they want their technology back, but then they keep talking about how Cyborg is the chosen one, and that's never explained. It doesn't make any sense what they want Cyborg for. Do they want him to become their leader? Do they want to sacrifice him? What do they want him for? That's never explained. These guys, beyond wanting their technology back that was stolen from them, their motivations are very vague and just not explained at all, and that makes them very boring villains. And then you've also got these human beings from the reality where Silas Stone turned himself and his wife into cyborgs, and they are at war with these aliens, and at one point, one of them, who is an alternate reality version of Sarah from this reality, she kills Cyborg, and then he comes back to life. And that's kind of an ongoing mystery in this book. The software that is part of what makes Victor Stone a cyborg, it is regenerating. It kind of gives him back his human form at the end of the book. I guess that's a spoiler, except that it doesn't make any sense why it would do that. At one point, it doesn't look like he has any of his cybernetic stuff left. He was somehow able to cure every cyborg in the DC universe of being a cyborg, but then his cybernetic stuff just restores him back to being a human, and then he turns himself back into a cyborg. None of it makes any sense at all. I was very confused by all of this. Unfortunately, if you asked me, are you going to read Volume 2, I would say no. I'm in a very similar situation here than I was with the Starfire book, where this just is not grabbing me. I am not part of the target audience here, although unlike Starfire, where I felt like that was always aimed at young teenage girls, I feel like this book could have worked for me if it wasn't so much trying to defecate all over the character of Cyborg that I know and love. And that may sound really harsh, except that I don't think there was any reason to reboot this character so hard. And yes, I know this is part of a reboot, but the New 52 was notorious for rebooting some things really hard and then rebooting other things barely at all. Batman and Green Lantern, when the reboot first started, they were hardly rebooted at all. They were basically the same book that they were the month before the reboot started. So I don't really understand why they felt the need to, say, bring Victor Stone's dad back back to life and have Victor Stone be more like he was in the cartoon. Stuff that just doesn't work for me on a premise level. I think that I would have been much more interested in this if this had been a story about the pre-52 Cyborg being more of a grown, emotional person who's not so much of a teenager, basically. That's kind of my thoughts on this book. I did not enjoy it very much, but maybe if you are a big fan of Cyborg from the Justice League and the New 52 stuff, then you might enjoy this book. I'm not going to say that absolutely nobody would enjoy it. It's just that it wasn't for me. And if you are a huge fan of the Teen Titans stuff from the 1980s, like I am, then you probably also will not enjoy this book. So those are my thoughts on Cyborg Unplugged. I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back later in the week with some other videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.